So welcome to the fourth episode of the drawing workshop. So in this workshop we're going to be talking about shading technique and value. So some of you might be wondering what value means in terms of drawing. Value doesn't have anything to do with morality, it just has to do with how light or dark something is when talking about drawing. So for instance, in this copy of the John Singer Sargent painting, the background is a very dark value. And then right around here, all of this part of the face is a very light value. And so when you're working from life or working from a photograph, you have to try to match these values very closely. And often students will either make everything too light or everything too dark. So just try to match the values as closely as possible. So there are two exercises that I'm going to give that will really help you create even shading and give you more control over the value. So the first exercise, we're just going to start out with a square. And this is good practice for the line drawing that we were working on in the first episode. So you want to draw the square with the horizontal lines parallel with the horizontal lines in the paper, and the vertical lines parallel with the vertical lines in the paper. So here we go. Vertical lines parallel with the vertical lines in the paper. Horizontal lines parallel with the horizontal lines in the paper. Okay? Make this at least 4 inches wide and 4 inches tall. You don't want to make it too small because then it's not as good of a teaching tool. So there are a couple principles when shading. The first is you don't want to move your wrist unless you're working on a very small portion of a drawing. You don't want to use your fingers or your wrist, especially when doing something this large or when you're shading in a background. Use your full arm. When we start drawing like the intricacies of the details of an eye, or start doing very fine work with a portrait painting or portrait drawing, then we'll start using the pencil like this. But for something like this, for this exercise, use your arm. And just as I said earlier in the previous videos, open and close your elbow, keep your shoulders relaxed, sit up straight. Okay? So when you're drawing a square, just drawing an even value all the way through, you want to start at the top left corner and go all the way down to the bottom right corner. Now this is if you're a righty. If you're a lefty, it's the exact opposite. So you start at the top right corner and go to the bottom left corner. Okay? And this is just so that your palm does not smear all the charcoal all over the place. I know the video is reversed, so that might be a little bit confusing. Yeah, I know my rights and lefts. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start in the bottom, in the top left corner, using my whole arm. Okay, I'm going to go at a slight angle. And actually, as I'm doing this, I'll mention a few pitfalls. So the first pitfall is to shade like this with your wrist. So often students will shade like this, and it just warps the shape. So especially if you're drawing something very boxy with flat planes, you want to use your whole arm because this insinuates something round. And so you don't want to use your whole wrist, or you bend your wrist when drawing a very flat object. The second pitfall in shading is to have large white spaces in between the individual shading lines. So something like that, okay? It's not an even value. There's some dark, there's some lighter. It just breaks up the value and it's not consistent. So the shading should not look like that. Okay? The third is for all the shading to be one direction. And this is not, yeah, that's a little bit strange actually because everything's reversed. The numbers are the opposite direction. But the third pitfall is for all the shading to be in one direction. So if I shade like this, and then go over it again, the same direction, it just starts looking like it's raining outside. And that can be used, again, all these different types of shading can be used if they're used for a specific purpose. For instance, something like this could possibly be used when trying to get some texture in the hair. This can be used when you're trying to get the shape of a roundish object. And this can be used just to make each of the flat forms a little bit more delineated. But to start out with, I just want you to get a very, very even value that's not scratchy, that's very consistent. Okay, so I'll finish shading this box. And shading a large area with an even value does take a lot of discipline and a lot of patience. The temptation is to go back and forth and do this really quickly. Which can be a bit of an issue. This pencil needs to be sharpened. Okay, let's go over it again, and this time at a different angle. And it's okay if the charcoal goes a little bit off the edge of the box. You can always erase that later. It doesn't need to be perfect. Something a little bit like this. Slightly sharper angle. So here is the second exercise. Second exercise is to create 5 boxes. The first one will be the darkest. So I'm going to go over it several times. And again, every time you go over it at a different angle. And that will help keep it all even. Okay? Now we're going to go at a slightly lighter value. Go over it again at a different angle. And get another angle. And now we're going to go over the next box and make it a little bit lighter. And again. Okay. And now even lighter for this one. Okay, and then we can get even lighter for this one. Okay, so for each of these you can make them a little bit more refined and even than I did it. I'm going to get a little bit darker with this one. A little bit darker with this one. Yeah, so this exercise is super helpful just to be able to work with subtle gradations of value and not going all at once from dark to light, because a lot of the shading happens right in this area. It's not all this and it's not all that. So this exercise will just give you a little bit more control over the value when you draw. So if you have any more questions, you can email me at samuelcwalter@gmail.com. The email will be in the description. And so, yeah, just please let me know if you have any questions for this. You have a good day.